The decision was delivered without warning, sealed beneath the king's signature, and carried across the Atlantic in a private communication that left Prince Harry unable to speak. King Charles had not merely issued another palace statement. He had activated a sweeping royal order that stripped Meghan of every remaining channel through which she could publicly speak in the crown's name. One signature had silenced her royal voice and reduced his youngest son to tears. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles sat alone. He read every line, lowered the fountain pen, and signed the Sovereign Representation Order. The order was a formal command, defining who could speak with royal authority. Its purpose was brutally clear now. Meghan could no longer issue statements, support campaigns, contact institutions, or appear at events in any way that suggested she represented the British monarchy. The king did not celebrate. He set the pen beside the file, while a senior aide waited outside for instructions that never came. The second page struck even harder. It removed permission to use the royal coat of arms, palace branding, official family correspondence, and communication channels tied to her former role. The coat of arms was the crown's official symbol, and losing it meant losing the last visible bridge between the Sussex household and the institution Charles had sworn to protect. Any attempt to imply royal support would trigger an immediate correction from Buckingham Palace, the monarch's main working headquarters, followed by permanent withdrawal of ceremonial recognition. Harry read the sealed notice twice in California. His hands tightened around the paper as he reached the distribution list. Commonwealth offices, charities, broadcasters, and diplomatic contacts had already received guidance. His father had prepared for resistance before the document crossed the Atlantic. That knowledge broke something deeper than anger. The Duke lowered his head, gripped the table, and began to cry because the decision had not only restricted his wife, it had publicly severed their household from the crown. Meghan refused to accept the meaning. She insisted no decree could erase her connection to the family, or silence her account of what had happened behind palace walls. Then she looked at her husband and asked the question he feared most. Had he known this was coming? Harry said nothing. His silence became the first fracture created by the order. But to understand why Charles was prepared to wound his own son so deeply, the people trapped inside this confrontation must first be understood, not as royal symbols, but as a father, a husband, and a woman who refused to be erased. Behind the language of duty stood three people carrying three very different wounds. Charles believed the monarchy had been repeatedly challenged by someone no longer serving it. Meghan believed the institution wanted her visible only when convenient, and silent whenever she resisted. Harry stood between them, still seeking protection from the father he had accused of failing him. The royal order was legal in appearance, but emotionally, it was a family confrontation years in the making. Charles carried the crown as something borrowed, not owned. To him, the monarchy was an inheritance temporarily placed in his care, and every symbol attached to it had to be protected for the next generation. That was why Meghan's continued use of royal language felt larger than criticism. The king believed it blurred the line between a private citizen and someone speaking with the authority of the institution. If that line vanished, the future monarch would inherit confusion instead of stability. Meghan saw the same conflict differently. Her public voice had become the one form of power the palace could not fully remove after she and Harry stepped away from royal duties. Those duties were the official appearances and responsibilities carried out on behalf of the sovereign. She had built a separate life, created her own platform, and refused to believe that independence required silence. To her, the order was not protection. It was control wearing the language of tradition. Harry felt the document reopening an older wound. He remembered how isolation, pressure, and institutional silence had surrounded his mother, and every restriction placed upon his wife seemed to echo that loss. Sitting alone with Meghan, he admitted that the order felt aimed at him as much as it was aimed at her. His father knew what memory it would awaken. He knew why the decree would cut deeper than any public insult. Charles felt that pain too, though he refused to show it openly. He studied an old photograph of his sons before a senior aide entered the room. The monarch turned it face down immediately, as though hiding the image could also hide the guilt. Camilla later urged him not to weaken the decision. She warned that hesitation would invite another round of accusations and make the crown appear frightened. The queen consort saw retreat as danger. He saw it as temptation. Meghan's phone rang before the day was over. An organization wanted to know whether she could still be introduced with royal language at an upcoming event. She paused, realizing the order was already changing how the world addressed her. Harry watched her struggle for an answer, then admitted he had still expected a personal call from his father before the document arrived. Meghan looked at him with quiet frustration. Waiting for royal compassion, she said, had already cost them too much. Yet this conflict did not begin with the signature in London. It began weeks earlier, during one private event, where a single sentence spoken by Meghan convinced Charles that silence was no longer a request. It had to become an order. Every royal rupture has a moment that later appears inevitable. This one began inside a closed, charitable reception in California, where phones were supposedly surrendered and no press had been invited. Meghan rose to speak about leadership, survival, and the cost of entering powerful families. Then she made one carefully worded reference to decisions being made by those preparing to inherit the crown. Within 48 hours, a recording of that sentence had reached King Charles. Meghan had chosen her words carefully, but their meaning was impossible to miss. At the private leadership reception in Montecito, she told the invited guests that major royal decisions were now being shaped by the next reign rather than the present one. The next reign meant the future period when the current heir would become monarch and take control of the crown. She never named William, yet everyone understood the accusation. The future king, she was suggesting, had already begun directing efforts to push the Sussexes further outside royal life. One guest broke the rules. A phone remained hidden, part of the speech was recorded, and the audio was sent to a London advisor with a written account of the evening. That advisor passed it through palace security channels, the protected system used to deliver sensitive information to senior royal officials. The recording crossed the Atlantic before Meghan even knew it existed. By the time Harry learned what had happened, his father had already heard every word. Charles listened alone. He removed his glasses, asked for the final sentence to be played again, and remained silent until the recording ended. Then the king gave only 4 words. "This ends now." The phrase carried more than anger. It confirmed that the palace had been waiting for one clear moment, strong enough to justify a final response. Harry confronted Meghan as soon as he discovered the audio had reached Britain. He did not accuse her of lying. He feared something worse. Her words had given the institution the evidence it needed to act. The Duke warned that the palace would treat the speech as proof that she was presenting private suspicion as inside knowledge. Meghan refused to retract it. She insisted that she had described her own experience and had never claimed to speak officially for the monarchy. William entered his father's office carrying a documented file. The prince showed Charles earlier cases in which charities, broadcasters, and foreign hosts had appeared uncertain about whether the Sussexes still held royal authorization. Royal authorization meant direct permission to speak or act in the crown's name. Buried inside the file was a draft response prepared months before. The sovereign representation order had not been created after Montecito. The speech had merely awakened it. Harry called his father's private office and demanded a conversation. The answer came without warmth. The king was unavailable. In that instant, the Duke understood that the conflict had moved beyond family emotion and into formal action. The recording had turned private resentment into a constitutional problem, and when Meghan demanded to confront the decision directly, Charles agreed, setting the stage for the most painful face-to-face encounter of his reign. There were no cameras, no public smiles, and no carefully staged family reunion. Meghan entered the private meeting, prepared to challenge the order, while Harry arrived hoping to prevent one final break between his wife and his father. Charles waited beside a closed folder, his expression calm enough to be frightening. When the door shut and the aides withdrew, the monarch looked directly at Meghan and told her that the crown would no longer answer to her version of events. Charles allowed no press officers, lawyers, or household staff to remain once the secure video link began. The protected connection was designed for private royal conversations that could not be exposed or interrupted. That mattered, because every word now carried personal and institutional consequences. The king stated that Meghan could speak as a private citizen, but she could never again suggest that her platform carried royal authority, approval, endorsement, or confidential access. Meghan refused to accept the distinction. She accused the palace of using formal language to frighten charities, organizers, and public figures away from working with her. To her, the decree was not simply about protecting the monarchy. It was punishment for speaking about pain the institution wanted buried. Harry watched the exchange tighten, then interrupted with the question he had been holding back. Did control matter more to his father than preserving their relationship? Charles paused before answering. The monarchy, he said, could not survive if family affection overruled duty whenever emotions became unbearable. That answer struck Harry like a final rejection. His father was not denying love. He was placing the institution above it. Meghan leaned forward. She said the order would not change what she knew or what she had experienced. The king closed the folder and answered with controlled force. Knowledge is not representation. His meaning was clear. Personal memory did not create official authority, and private experience did not give anyone the right to speak for the crown. Harry's voice broke next. He asked whether his children were also being pushed outside the family. Charles insisted the restrictions concerned public authority, not blood. Yet the explanation offered no comfort, because ceremonial recognition, public identity, and family belonging had become impossible to separate. The hidden clause changed everything. Every remaining patronage, honorary association, and ceremonial connection tied to the Sussex household would now be reviewed. A patronage was an official relationship in which a royal figure publicly supported an organization, while honorary associations linked family members to institutions without giving them direct control. Meghan removed her earpiece and walked away. Harry stayed seated, crying silently as his father waited. Meghan returned with her face hardened. Charles offered one final chance to sign a voluntary acknowledgement of the boundary. She refused. The monarch activated the order without her agreement, and Harry understood that nothing in the room had been repaired. The confrontation ended without reconciliation, but the true scale of the king's move was still hidden inside the machinery supporting it. And one person had quietly ensured that Charles could not retreat. Charles had signed the order, but the architecture beneath it bore the unmistakable influence of the future king. William had spent months examining how royal identity was being used beyond palace control, and he believed ambiguity had become dangerous. Yet this was not a triumphant seizure of power. Before presenting the final recommendation, he stood alone outside his father's office, reread the first page, and hesitated, knowing the document could protect the crown while destroying what remained of his brotherhood. William had commissioned a confidential review long before the Montecito recording reached London. The review examined how former working royals used titles, insignia, introductions, charitable links, and public language after leaving official service. Former working royals were family members who no longer carried out duties for the sovereign, yet could still possess titles and public recognition. That uncertain space mattered, because the Sussexes remained connected by blood, while operating commercially and politically beyond palace control. The findings were blunt. Charities did not always know whether Meghan's appearances carried royal approval. Broadcasters sometimes introduced Harry in ways that suggested official access. Foreign hosts treated the couple as independent figures in one moment and representatives of the monarchy in the next. William believed that confusion could become dangerous during a diplomatic dispute or political campaign, where one careless introduction might be mistaken for the crown's position. A longtime aide stopped the prince before he entered Charles's office and handed him an old photograph of the brothers as children. The aide asked quietly whether he was prepared to lose Harry completely. William stared at the image and admitted he did not want his brother humiliated. Yet he feared that allowing Meghan to keep undefined royal influence would create a larger crisis that the next reign would be forced to solve. Camilla supported the strongest version of the order. She warned Charles that partial restrictions would invite loopholes and fresh accusations. Anne resisted that severity. The Princess Royal insisted the document must separate personal speech from formal representation, meaning the recognized power to speak or act on behalf of the sovereign. Her intervention changed the final wording. Meghan could tell her story, criticize the institution, and build independent campaigns, but she could not present those actions as connected to the crown. Charles still considered delaying implementation. The king feared the emotional cost to Harry, and wondered whether one private conversation might soften the confrontation. William ended that hope by warning that the Montecito recording would soon reach the press. Delay would not look compassionate. It would look like panic. The monarch authorized immediate distribution, then asked the question neither man wanted to face. Would Harry ever forgive them? William lowered the photograph and answered that forgiveness might no longer be theirs to demand. Once the order left the palace, strategy became consequence. Invitations changed, phone calls stopped, and Meghan discovered that royal silence could travel faster than any public statement. The first consequences arrived quietly. There was no dramatic announcement, no televised condemnation, and no palace official celebrating victory. Instead, an event organizer changed Meghan's introduction. A charity removed the royal crest from archived material. A diplomatic contact postponed a meeting without explanation. By evening, the meaning of Charles's order had become unmistakable. The palace had not merely limited her words, it had severed the invisible network that once made every room treat her as royalty. Meghan received the first confirmation on her phone. A major international leadership forum informed her that she could still attend, but only as the founder of her private organization. There would be no royal title, no crest, no ceremonial introduction, and no reference to crown service. Crown service meant official work carried out in support of the monarch. The change mattered, because royal language had once opened doors before she entered them. Now those same doors were being carefully closed. A charity linked to the Sussexes moved next. After receiving formal guidance from the King's Communications Office, it removed palace imagery from its website and rewrote archived descriptions of earlier events. Meghan read the revised introduction twice, placed the phone down, and told Harry that the palace had turned etiquette into public exile. He heard the anger in her voice, but he also heard fear. The order was no longer a document. It was becoming their new reality. Harry called a former royal aide and demanded an explanation. The aide refused to discuss the decree and said every future message had to pass through official legal channels. Legal channels were the controlled routes used by lawyers and authorized representatives when personal communication had broken down. The Duke ended the call in disbelief. Someone who had once answered him within minutes now spoke as though he were a stranger. Charles received confirmation that the order was being followed. The king showed no satisfaction. He asked only whether his son had tried to contact him directly. When told that Harry had called an aide instead, the monarch looked away, wounded by the distance he had helped create. The first public test came hours later. An upcoming appearance still advertised Meghan as a representative voice from inside the royal family. Palace officials issued an immediate correction, and broadcasters replaced the wording before the event began. She would be introduced solely as a private public figure. Harry watched the revised broadcast language appear and covered his face. He admitted that he once believed leaving royal duty would give them freedom without costing them family recognition. Meghan refused to cancel. She stepped forward under her own name and delivered the speech without royal styling, palace language, or borrowed authority. That defiance changed everything. By stepping forward without the crown, Meghan proved she could not be erased. But later that night, away from advisors and audiences, Harry finally told her what the battle had taken from him. The turning point did not happen in a palace office or before a global audience. It came after midnight, when Harry and Meghan sat alone with every phone switched off and every advisor dismissed. For the first time since the decree arrived, neither spoke about strategy, headlines, or retaliation. Harry looked at his wife and admitted that he was no longer crying only because of what his father had done. He was mourning the family he had spent years expecting to return. Harry confessed that every confrontation with the palace had been sustained by one private hope. He had believed a final conversation might restore the bond between father and son. The Sovereign Representation Order had destroyed that illusion. The order was the formal command separating private Sussex activity from the authority of the Crown. To him, it proved that the monarchy and the family now followed different rules, and blood no longer guaranteed emotional access. Meghan listened without interrupting. He told her that seeing Charles's signature had not made him feel like an adult facing an institutional decision. It had made him feel like a child being formally excluded. The decree mattered because it turned years of distance into something permanent, written, and enforceable. It also forced him to admit that he had been waiting for a version of home that no longer existed. Meghan took his hand. She said she would not ask him to choose between his wife and his father, because that demand had already shaped too much of his life. Her words softened something inside him. For once, she was not asking him to fight. She was giving him permission to stop. Harry made the decision without aides, lawyers, or advisors present. He would not challenge the order through a public campaign, retaliatory interview, or immediate legal battle. Instead, he recorded a private voice message for Charles. In it, the Duke said he would respect the boundary around royal representation, but he could not pretend the manner of its delivery had caused no pain. Charles listened alone. The king lowered his head when his son said, "I wanted a father before I needed a sovereign." A sovereign was the reigning monarch, the person carrying the crown's highest authority. He recorded a response, deleted it, tried again, and deleted that too. His final message was brief. Duty, he admitted, carried consequences even a monarch could not command others to forgive. Harry read the reply in silence. He chose to stop seeking an undefined half-position inside royal life, while Meghan agreed that their future public work would stand entirely on its own identity. They had lost the bridge to the crown, but they would no longer live waiting for permission to cross it. Their decision deprived the palace of the public war many expected. But once the decree became known, the world transformed one family's private surrender into a global judgment on monarchy, marriage, and power. By sunrise, the confidential order had become the only royal story that mattered. Broadcasters called it the strongest boundary imposed on the Sussexes since their departure. Commentators argued over whether Charles had defended the crown or sacrificed his son to protect it. Yet one image captured the public mood more powerfully than any debate. Outside Buckingham Palace, supporters and critics stood beneath the same rain, divided by barriers but staring toward the same silent balcony. A major London newspaper carried the front-page headline, "The King draws the final line," beneath contrasting photographs of Charles signing documents and Harry appearing visibly distressed. A breakfast broadcaster opened its coverage by explaining that Meghan remained free to speak as a private citizen, but no longer held recognized authority to speak with the symbolic weight of the monarchy. That authority meant the public trust and influence attached to someone acting with direct royal approval. The distinction mattered because the decree had not silenced her voice. It had stripped away the crown's shadow behind it. The crowd outside Buckingham Palace made that division impossible to ignore. One woman held a placard reading, "Duty has a human cost." Another stood only a few feet away carrying the words, "The crown must be protected." Their messages captured the two sides of the crisis. One saw a wounded family. The other saw an institution defending itself before private conflict could weaken public confidence. Harry watched the footage from California. When a commentator described his tears as proof that the royal family had broken beyond repair, he turned off the television. Meghan remained beside him, watching the blank screen. Supporters praised her decision to appear independently, while critics argued that the order exposed how long uncertainty around her royal position had strengthened her platform. She had regained control of her own identity, but the world was now judging every part of it. Charles faced the anger in public. During a scheduled engagement, someone called out, "Bring your son home." The king faltered for a moment, then continued without answering. William met questions later and refused to discuss private family matters. The prince said only that clearly defined public roles protected everyone involved. His words defended the decision, but they could not hide its cost. The palace then released the complete wording of the order. It confirmed that family titles had not been removed, but any claim of official representation now required direct sovereign approval. Sovereign approval meant personal authorization from the reigning monarch. Without it, the Sussexes could speak only for themselves. Harry finally issued a restrained, documented statement. He accepted the new boundary and asked that his children not be used as symbols in the dispute. The anger began to cool, but the damage remained. The noise eventually faded, leaving only the people who had made the decision and those forced to live with it. And the final meaning of the king's bold move could no longer be measured in headlines. In the end, King Charles achieved exactly what the order was designed to accomplish. Meghan's public work was permanently separated from the authority, imagery, and institutional voice of the British monarchy. There would be no confusion, no shared platform, and no suggestion that she represented the sovereign. But victory inside a palace can resemble loss inside a family. The crown emerged with a clearer boundary, while a father and son were forced to accept that love alone could not restore the life they had already dismantled. Meghan rebuilt her public identity without royal insignia, palace-linked introductions, or claims of institutional access. Royal insignia meant the official symbols that connect a person or office to the crown. Removing them mattered because her future work would now succeed or fail on its own strength, not on the influence of a title she no longer served. She did not disappear, she simply stood apart. Harry faced a harder truth. He could no longer remain emotionally dependent on future reconciliation, while publicly opposing the system his father represented. The hope of returning to some undefined place inside royal life had kept him trapped between two worlds. Now that hope was gone. Painful as it was, the loss finally gave him clarity. Charles refused to weaken the sovereign representation order. The king believed a boundary lost all meaning if it was rewritten merely to ease guilt. In one final recorded conversation, he told his son that the children would always be family, but their household would never again operate as an informal extension of the crown. Harry did not offer forgiveness. He acknowledged the distinction. ended the exchange without anger and chose distance over another cycle of accusation. Meghan placed the sealed notice inside a private drawer. She did not display it, destroy it, or discuss it in an interview. That quiet act mattered. For the first time, a palace decision would not dictate her next public move. Her future would no longer be built as a reaction to royal rejection. William understood the cost as clearly as the benefit. The prince knew the decree had protected the future reign from constitutional ambiguity, meaning uncertainty over who truly possessed the authority to represent the monarchy. Yet he also knew it had ended any realistic hope of Harry returning as a working royal. Charles later restored the photograph of his sons that he had once turned face down. The monarch accepted that protecting the institution had not erased his love, and duty had not absolved him of the pain he caused. The final verdict was unmistakable. Meghan had been silenced only in the language of royal authority, not as a woman. Harry's tears marked the death of his hope that he could leave the monarchy while still carrying its voice. The crown survived. The Sussexes became independent. The family changed forever. The order did not destroy the monarchy, and it did not silence Meghan as a woman. It ended the illusion that the Sussexes could remain outside the institution while still carrying its voice. And that final truth left the crown secure, the couple independent, and Harry grieving a royal home he would never occupy again. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.